There's been so many studies recently about the mind connecting to body and, the gut and how that affects your health. And I think the world is just starting to realize the connection more deeply. But you had mentioned earlier about meeting the needs of diverse populations. You may not look like me or sound like me, but we're still wanting to meet those needs, the cultural competencies of meeting the different populations. How are you going about doing that, meeting the needs of all the diverse individuals in our community?
Well, I think one of the first things you have to do is be able to have people in your team that other people can hear, not just listen to, but can hear. And sometimes that has to do with backgrounds. It has to do with their ability to be empathetic, and that may come from life experiences. And so that whole, we keep talking about the workforce shortages and all that. So as we make those decisions about who we're going to bring into our team, I think we have to be aware that we need to bring people in that can reach across some of those chasms and be able to speak to the folks that are actually coming to the door. What's the old saying about, I just built it, I don't understand why they don't come? We have to figure out what our folks need, and that's what we need to build.
So these sort of conversations are ones we should always lean into, and I think we always have to lean into them with a healthy dose of humility, because we don't look and act like everybody. We look and act like ourselves, and that makes us similar to some people out of the gate and dissimilar to others. And so when I was in school to become a psychologist, early 2000s, we had these you would call like diversity seminars. And it's not that long ago, just over 20 years ago. And the training was about like, here's how to work with all these people that aren't like you. And so it was sort of one-offs, like, here's how to work with the Native American population because they're not like you. And here's how to work with the Black population. They're not like you. And it was just sort of these one-off, like bite-sized Lunchables of how to work with people. And that used to be what we talked about. We talked about cultural competence. And I really feel like that's important training. I don't mean to demean the training, but that's not really going to open doors. And I also know that the task can't be only get services from people like you, because number one, that's nonsensical, and it doesn't promote that sort of we're all in this together as well.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that is this huge opportunity, but also this huge need is what do we do as agencies, but also as a society to make sure that we honor and celebrate the differences and recognize that all of us have different needs and different people groups and different experiences. And all of those things require a level of competence, lest I misunderstand something as a mental health issue that might truly just be a cultural factor or a trust factor or so many other things where just the risk of confusion and misunderstanding with each other goes up the more the differences are there.
I agree. I mean, I think the one thing, and Dee asked this earlier, I think the one thing that shows up more often than not are the people that are coming to you. And again, we talk about the folks that don't look like me, they don't sound like me, but you know what they see? They are able to see empathy and compassion. It's the part of the human experience that seems to transcend that. It has to be real, and it has to be genuine, and in nowhere more so than in behavioral health and mental health. There's no... You can't just look at someone and diagnose them. There's no wound to see. There's no arm to set. There's no cast to put on. You have to be able to be empathetic and understanding. And most of us have been through something. Most of us that work with people have been through something. And if you can capture that in your heart for a few minutes, as you're looking at someone, I guarantee you'll find a place to connect. And that's the people we have to get into our groups and help them understand this.
It's people that are able to be vulnerable and people that are serving people that are vulnerable. It's that vulnerability that our human nature tends to want to go, oh, I can't do that.
So there's so many directions I want to go with this. So and you made me think of another one. There's this marvelous book, and I think this is where I got it from, but it might be somewhere else, some social psychologist, but I think it was Daniel Pink, The Power of Regret. Highly recommend it. But one of the things that comes up in one of these books is, do you know what happens when people display more vulnerability? Their likability factor goes up. So while we think that vulnerability actually exposes us, so we don't want to show it, over and over again, when people actually get vulnerable and say, hey, and either share a little bit of what's going on with them or what they're struggling with, the people that hear that vulnerability tend to, on the whole, like you more not less. And I think it's so contrary to human nature because we're like, well, lock that crap down because then, no one
Unless
ever
you're
can
Brene
hurt
Brown,
you.
of course.
Right, of course, Brene Brown. I would love to be just like Brene Brown. But for the rest of us, it doesn't come easy to show that vulnerability. And I think that that's a really important piece in this is that we all have to sort of go first, right? That's vulnerability. Because if I reciprocate, great, I reciprocated, but you showed vulnerability. One of the things I want to state about mental health is it's not so long ago that whole people groups were on the receiving end of experiments and were on the experiments of broad categorization. Some of that persists today. Hopefully the worst and most malevolent of it has been rid from our society, but there are a lot of individuals in this community and so many others who remember those things, and they are gatekeepers, and they are rightfully, as they should be, protective and cautious about engaging with large systems of care because large systems of care haven't always been careful. And I think that that's one of those things that we have to wrestle with when we talk about competence is recognizing the context of why people are suspicious of care and why people aren't always open arms when we say, here we are, let's help, because there is a long history, even in an amazing country like the one we're in, of people not always being treated and received, even by the mental health system, in the best possible way.
Yeah, I think I would even take it a step further. I mean, I think I would issue a challenge. I mean, you and I have had this conversation several times. The leaders in this community, especially in mental health, behavioral health, and interventions, have got to display that. We've got to get over ourselves and become real. And, it didn't matter whether I was wearing a coat and tie or whether I was up there in my jeans at some of the hospitals that I've had where we've had adolescents. As long as I was real and was myself, I was just as accepted by them, regardless of those kind of things that paint the picture. Instead, they're able to see through your words and through your actions what you're doing. I think we should challenge the other leaders in the area
I love
to
that.
get over it, get over themselves. Your bottom line's going to be fine. Quit worrying about it. Let's take care of some people. And if those of us that are in these leadership roles will say, I'll do whatever it takes to make sure that the people that are entrusted to us get taken care of, I think we're fine.
What is your challenge? So you're like, hey, get over it. All right, we get over it.
Yeah.
And then what are we asking ourselves and others to do? What is the concrete, like, okay, I'm ready to buy what you're laying down, Jim. What are you laying down?
Yeah, let's come together. Let's talk about, in real terms, in truth, let's talk about what our real needs are here. Not just what we think we need to do, but what do we really need to do? Let's forget the stereotypes of what each of us does. Let's find our lane that we're great at and make that a superhighway instead of a bunch of roads that are crossing each other.
Show up.
Show up, sit down, be honest. Let's talk.
And I want to sound like I'm going to contradict myself, but I hope I'm not. I've also seen here and everywhere else that all these areas and people groups and gatekeepers, and again, we're talking different ethnic groups, we're talking the LGBTQ population, we're talking people with developmental disabilities. I mean, like, I'm talking across the gamut, so I'm not talking about just one group. But over and over, what I've seen is when, whether it's myself or someone else, when people enter space authentically and with some humility and ears open, mouth closed, which can come harder for you and me, people are usually happier there. I don't find massive distrust everywhere. What I find is you stop and listen, you claim the areas we as a system and we as an agency, and we've let you down and we're going to do better. People are pretty graceful about that sort of a thing, and mostly are, I find, happy that we're there to help.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think we've just got to be straight up. I mean, I hate to use this as an example, but you and I were very straight up the first time we met. I mean, we talked about what our goals and ambitions were and the things that were important, and it all came back to how are we going to be able to make a difference with the people that, again, I hate to overuse the word, but that are entrusted to us.
I think the coffee with the hyperverbal stuff,
true.
It really helped us go straight to the point.
Big cookie was what did it for me.
Oh, yeah, the
that
cookie.
was
Little
important.
sugar thing.
That was the
important,
coffee shop on Cherry Street.
Yeah,
Shout
really
out. That
great.
was delicious coffee and cookie.
And we're sorry we were there for hours, folks.
Right,
But
right.
that was-
Loitering.
but that very thing is very valuable because you just didn't sit there and talk about family and children's services. I just didn't sit there and talk about Parkside. What we talked about was the things that were important to us, the life that had brought us here this far, the things that caused us to want to take care of people and to help them get to a better place. And that was what the connection was. And I think what we find is that most people in our line of work, especially, have that as a core.
Yeah.
That's how we got into this.
Anybody who came to this line of work to get rich, I'm a little confused by your tactics.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Most people come to this field for the right reasons.
Right.